Renee is on.
I know, that's not my person. They're like a machine all the time.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay, we are live.
right. Good morning. All would like to call to order the CMP policy and implementation committee. First item on the agenda is adoption of the minutes from our May 26th P&I committee meeting. Can I get those minutes, please?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? All right, thank you. Okay, first up, we have Brad, who's going to review the executive director's report on the Bass River Township master plan, reexamination report, and ordinance. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning, commissioners. You should all have received a draft resolution and executive director's report on Bass River Township's 2022 master plan reexamination report and ordinance 2023-2. While these documents were both adopted in recent months, what is before you today has actually been the culmination of many years of in the making, many years work by the township in coordination with commission staff. The township's reexamination report was adopted back in December and is the typical periodic reexamination called for by municipal land use law. It contains a variety of recommendations in terms of amendments to their township zoning map and zoning code, which are implemented in ordinance 2023-2. Getting into the ordinance itself, it adopts a revised zoning map, as well as various amendments to the township's code. I'm kind of going to walk through some of the major highlights. The first set of changes I'll go over relate to the establishment of infill areas. The CMP allows municipalities to designate infill areas within the preservation area district. Infill areas allow for residential or commercial uses on lots existing as of January 14th, 1981 of at least 1 acre in size. No new subdivisions are permitted, and the CMP provides criteria for how municipalities can delineate infill areas. CMP requires that lots included have to have access to improved public roads, show an existing pattern of compact development, and include some amount of vacant lots of at least 1 acre in order to be eligible to designate. They aren't just to include extensive vacant acres, and for commercial infill areas, there has to be some element of commercial uses within the infill area itself. So while it's kind of rare that we see infill areas before the commission has in fact certified such areas in Chemung Township, Tatarack Township, and Woodland Township. In this case with Bass River, they've delineated 3 infill areas that staff finds meets the CMP requirements for such areas. We have various exhibits in the ED report that show each discrete area. They kind of range in size from about 117 acres to about 140 acres. And then it looks like Paul is showing the actual zoning map that the town adopted. It's a hefty file, so I think it's taking a little while to load. So you can see there's a vast majority of the township is preserved. It's in the preservation area district. So these infill areas are along Lake Town Road and Hamilton Road. Which I have a laser pointer. If I can even keep that far. Easy for me. Yes. So much of the area in North Bass River Township is preserved lands, Bass River State Forest, Warren River Bombing Range. And so the village is down in this area here, and the 3 infill areas are here, here, and here. So these were pockets of existing compact development with some opportunity for additional development with this infill designation. In the infill, so the two of those areas are infill residential districts where the only thing that's really being permitted is single family dwellings on lots of at least 1 acre. These would only be permitted under the prior zoning if cultural housing provisions were met or if the commission issued a waiver of strict compliance. In the infill commercial district, the township is also permitting retail, trade, and service establishments, convenience stores, bed and breakfast inns, roadside stands for retail sale of garden produce. And again, these would be limited to existing lots, at least 1 acre, that existed as of 1981. So Paul, if you could maybe just go
Zoom in.
no, go to the next. I think there was another set. Yes. So in the ED report, we created a set of 3 maps that sort of outlined where these infill areas are. There's outlines of the existing footprints of the principal buildings that are within the each discrete infill area. It's also showing the preserved lands and wetlands. And so you can sort of see that each of these was pretty carefully carved out of what makes sense to be in an infill district and didn't include large tracts of preserved lands or other large areas of land. Based on our analysis of the environmental constraints and the property ownership patterns, we're expecting that across all 3 infill areas, that there's really only going to be about a temporal increase of about 14 additional residential units. So while the infill areas are somewhat expansive, the type of development, the intensity of development is going to be pretty limited. So taking into account how these areas are delineated, what they're permitting and their zoning code, we feel that these infill areas are meeting the standards of the CLP. Paul, if you just want to scroll to the next one. So you can see that, these are really very limited areas that, that are upland, include some vacant and existing compact development. Or you can scroll to the last.
Can I do a sure. So the first map that Paul showed of the overall zoning map of the town, really, as Brad said, gives you a good idea of just how constrained any future development in Bass River is. And that's really what led to the township's delineation of the infill areas. The mayor and other people in the town, really came to us asking for, what can we do? Is there anything we can do to increase even a little bit residential development potential in the town? And they're so constrained between wetlands, state ownership, PDC deed restrictions. They have a village and that's it. And even in the village, there's not a whole lot of, major development potential. So these infill areas were really the only thing we came up with as a possible idea. And then we've spent, and Brad said, it seems like years now, figuring out how to draw the boundaries to make sure CMP standards are met while still providing. And as he said, 14 more houses, that's it. That's all we could come up with to sort of maybe some commercial, if there's, it's permitted, if there's actually a demand for it, who knows, right? That's another matter. But this was our best effort to respond to the town's request for additional residential development potential. And I just wanted to point that out. It's not something we initiated, it was really a response to the town's, sort of cry for help. They really wanted, even as small as this is, some additional development potential. So I just felt like I had to say that's where this all that's where it came from, and it's a unique situation, really. I mean, when you look at the amount of land preservation that's occurred, and then wetlands, and it's just they're very, very constrained and limited in terms of what can happen in the future. So
Yeah, I mean, I could just add that, you know, if you, in reading their re-examination report, they included some statistics about what has sort of been occurring in the township in the last 20 years. And the data they pulled from said that there was about 28 new residential units since 2000. So it's a town that does not see a whole lot of development. You know, in addition to working with the township on the infill areas, we also tried to provide some insights as to what they can potentially do in terms of the existing village. They made a couple of minor zoning changes to the village commercial zone, about 18 acres for going from village commercial, from village residential to village commercial. This was largely to eliminate the occurrence of split zone lots. But they also included some additional uses in the village commercial zone, such as restaurants, automotive filling stations and repair garages, ambulance dispatch service centers, roadside stands for retail, garden produce, and a variety of, and including medical and recreation cannabis dispensaries. But in general, they were trying to provide more opportunities for diverse uses within the village commercial. Additionally, both the village commercial and village residential zones permit detached single family dwelling units. They are revising the minimum lot size from 2 acres to 1 acre. This was actually essentially a reversion back to what the village previously had prior to the year 2004, when the township kind of voluntarily decided to increase the lot sizes from 1 to 2. The CMP does permit municipalities to zone for 1 acre lots in villages, provided that it doesn't impact the existing character of the village. And the CMP also puts limits on how much development can occur in a village based on what development existed in 1979. So there's a thing in the CMP referred to as the doubling rule. Essentially, back in 1979, we counted up all the primary structures within the villages when they were coming into conformance. And essentially you get to double that number based on your zoning. So when we're thinking about the lot sizes changing, we want to make sure that it's not creating more than a doubling of what existed in the village in 1979. At that time, our prior analyses showed that there were about 315 dwelling units. And based on the lots, the changes to the minimum lot size, we expect that there's, you know, about roughly, I think it was somewhere around 200, somewhere around 220 residential units additional that would be potentially permitted through below the minimum lot size. So they're well under that cap. Lastly, in terms of the sort of other various things that happened with the zoning changes, they did establish some additional areas of highway commercial in their in the area of the township east of the Garden State Parkway. So this is in the Pinelands National Reserve, but outside of the state designated Pinelands area. When we certified Bass River Townships, initially certified them in I think 1982 or 3. We also, they voluntarily requested that we certify their PNR area. And so we reviewed the changes in the changes to the PNR zones, and they are substantially conforming to subchapters 5 and 6 as required by the CMP. These were just it's about 70 acres along Route 9 that are upland areas with some existing commercial activity. In addition, you know, I think, you know, Bass River Township hasn't made a whole lot of changes to their zoning code over the years since initial adoption in the early 80s. So a lot of this was sort of modernizing various elements of the code that have not been updated in years. So they've moved on from a very old district schedule that I don't know how any zoning administrator was able to read that. I mean, I had to borrow Betsy Pinder's my last year. So they now have a more modern zoning schedule that I think any future zoning administrator is going to appreciate. We carefully reviewed the entire Title 17 zone code to make sure that every CMP standard is as up to date. Yeah, I think I'll just end with, so overall, I think a lot of great things came out of this rather lengthy process. I'll just note that we did receive a number of public comments during our open public comment period. And I just wanted to note that there was, as noted in the executive director's report, it appears that many of the commenters were reacting to a different set of zoning changes that the township was considering at the same time as our public hearing. They were considering rezoning more of North Maple Avenue in New Gretna to village commercial. There was some very large public meetings, and the township ultimately decided they were not going to proceed with that. So that wasn't a zoning change that was part of the reexamination report or this ordinance. So I just wanted to make a note that that wasn't under consideration as part of this review. So with that, we found that these changes are consistent with CMP. As of today, we're asking for a recommendation to the planning commission on whether or not to certify.
All right, wow. Thank you, Brad. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this board? Okay.
The infill area, I presume it's a non-sewer area.
Correct.
And so is the municipality aware that drainage treatment systems will be required.
Yes. Yes.
They're prepared to do that. So, thank you.
Next, anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
First off, I'd like to compliment the staff for going the extra mile to help with the township with
That
that.
would be Brad.
Well, right.
Brad. Yeah.
There's a lot of credit. I can imagine this was a lot of hard work and probably took time. It can serve as an example to the other communities in Pinelands. We're not here to just crazy. We're here to help too. So thank you for doing that. You didn't mention anything about PDCs, and I'm imagining that this will have a somewhat beneficial impact. When I see some possible additional PDCs.
No, because PDCs typically wouldn't be used in a village unless there was an undersized lot or some kind of variance, and so that's maybe, but this doesn't really change that. And then not in the infill areas either. I mean, they have to meet all, like, they have to meet the lot size requirement. It would only be if a waiver were necessary, so that really hasn't changed much of anything. I do want to recognize that, and you alluded to it, the amount of time and effort that Brad put into this. I mean, he says that, the town created a new code. Brad created a new code, yeah, largely because Brad was writing and rewriting, and this has been over several years of work when this all began. It was all really triggered by, and this is mentioned in the report as well. The town actually adopted a prior master plan report requesting that the village of New Gretna and somewhat 6,000 or 7,000 acres of land be removed from the planning area. That's what triggered that. When we met with them and said, well, that's not something that can happen. We require that with the legislature. That's not something we support, but let's talk about what else we can do instead of that. If what you're seeking is more development potential, so that's kind of what triggered that. It's very unusual. That hasn't been requested over the years, but that's what started us down this path, and it hasn't been a straight path. It has some twists and turns and some challenges along the way, but the end result, I think, is something that we're quite happy with.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think one of the challenges that, in terms of planning office side of things does here is that, you know, we're trying to provide guidance. We didn't say you have to adopt infill areas. We said, these are your options based on the objectives that you have expressed to us. And, you know, and so it's like, it was a lengthy negotiation of like, well, here are your options, and, you know, sort of narrow it in, and a lot of discussions, and, you know, and so that I would say a lengthy part of that process.
Absolutely, and you know, to echo Mark's comments, I think that it's a lot of what, you know, obviously driving and what the staff does on a larger scale is, you know, trying to understand what the desired outcomes are and working with individuals, entities, towns, whoever the case may be, to figure out, to lay out optionality and help them, you know, along that path to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So it's really excellent work. You own the job. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Brad?
I have some questions.
Go ahead.
To the best of my memory, there is no sewer at all in Bass River, is that correct?
Yes.
So even in the village, they're gonna most likely have to use an alternative
Yeah.
to something.
Okay. And that's true even without changing the zone.
Right.
Right, yeah, so that's definitely a yes, and I think, you know, the numbers that Brad talked about in terms of the residential development potential in the village, 200 some units, I mean. I think we could all say that's very unlikely to ever occur. That requires subdivision, you know, alternate design treatment systems for every unit, so I think the actual development will be much smaller.
I think they tried one community septic systems that failed miserably.
Yeah, that was a proposal that we actually worked on with the town. I'll say decades ago now,
Yes, sir.
right? And
Boy, was my hair.
right, it was a long time ago, same kind of issue that the township brought to the commission saying. We want to be able to do more, we want more gradables, we want more development in the village, what can we do? And at that time, the thought was, well, let's work with them on some sort of community treatment system that various uses in the village could tie into. That did not succeed.
So the other question I have is the area of the infill area. Did we check what the forest fire hazard rating was?
I did not.
Yeah, but I would expect that most of Bass River is in the high. Yeah, you know, so that's why we focused on these small areas along the existing roads with additional development and, you know, didn't let them sprawl into the larger area. So.
Someone has a chance, could they email or text me what the protection?
Yeah.
Because they have not been supportive of active forest fire protection over the years. That's all I have.
Thanks, Alan. Any other questions or comments?
I have a curiosity question.
Just here, microphones. Thanks.
After you did all of this with the master plan revisions and everything, then did they send you a copy of the 2023-7?
The ordinance?
Yeah, the new
the other
one.
one, the other one, but they didn't.
The one that all the newspaper articles about.
Could we?
So when we received what we're reviewing today, I got a phone call from the township attorney asking, hey, we were considering maybe doing some additional zoning changes within the village, which my heart skipped a beat. So we were aware of it, and again, we sort of shared, well, here are your options. But first and foremost, we're recommending that you treat this as a separate matter from this ordinance, which we would like to get over the finish line. And so I was aware, and I mean, it's, you know, they were largely trying to figure out what would be the best means to deal with the redevelopment of the existing former elementary school.
But we haven't seen an actual finished ordinance to do that. I'm not sure that they got that far.
The most I got was the information that was on the public hearing was,
Yeah.
so it described the lots that are dealing with.
Prepare for litigation.
Any other questions or comments? All right,
Resolution.
yes, please, yes, so,
I'd like to move that we recommend this to the full commission.
thank you, can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, thank you, and Brad, thanks again, incredible. I mean, I'm speechless, that's it, more than I work. Okay, next up, we have Stacy, consideration of an additional extension of the secondary impact agreement between the commission and Atlantic County for Garden State Parkway Interchange 44. I think we also have, on the line in case we have questions or anything Atlantic County specific. Renee is on as well.
She is the department head for regional planning and development departments.
All right, Stacy, take it away. And turn your mic on. If not necessarily.
Okay, so this goes all the way back to May of 2013 with the development of or completion of interchange 24. Which is near Stockton University. So at the time, it was half a cloverleaf and they were completing the cloverleaf. This project was subject to the Garden State Parkway Overlay District rules, which require that within 1.5 miles of the development, you have to obviate secondary impacts. And we use the word obviate because we weren't going to require that people actually buy the parcels. If they could have gotten an easement or a deed restriction, that was viable. In this case, Atlantic County decided to go ahead and actually purchase the properties.
And I have to interject because Stacy mentioned the Parkway Overlay District rules that are in this DEP. And probably a little known fact, that was one of the things that Commissioner Lloyd helped me write, the two of us together. That was the first time I really worked that close to that 17, 18 years ago. And we wrote those rules together. It was a wonderful experience. We both had a great time. And unusual, we don't usually ask commissioners to write rules. But we did those together and it was great. And I have great memories of that and how much enthusiasm he had for that was wonderful. And so that's what we're basing all this on still today. It's pretty cool.
So the secondary impacts agreement was signed in December 2013. And what it established was, and I have right here with the picture next.
Yes,
So what it established was, they could either acquire lands at a 1-to-1 ratio here or obviate secondary impacts here in tier 1. And as we moved out, it kept doubling. So 3 miles out was double the requirement, and then I think it's 9 miles out or so, I can't see from here, it tripled the requirement. And Atlantic County decided they were going to acquire all of the necessary acreage here in tier 1, which is within a mile and a half.
so if you're looking for the next map, I have to switch the screens here.
Yeah.
Do you need it now?
No.
Okay,
So the obligation was to acquire 356 acres within tier 1. Since 2013, Atlantic County has been actively trying to acquire the acreage. The original agreement had a 6-year window whereby they had to acquire the acreage, or if they didn't to acquire it, then whatever the remainder was, the value of that land, they had to give a payment to either an NGO or a university to continue to obviate the secondary impacts in that area. There have been 2 extensions to the secondary impacts or the obligation or expiration date, the secondary impacts agreement. Both because, or actually, I guess the first one, stretching my memory a little bit. In each instance, the county had acquired the bulk of the lands that were required. The last one was about a year ago when they had all of 10 acres left to acquire. And at that time, the county board of commissioners, they adopted an ordinance that affords the county the ability to acquire lands either through acquisition or eminent domain, because the remaining acreage, they're finding there are title issues associated with it. So they have developed a plan to acquire the remaining acres. Right, the current request is for another 12-month extension. All they have left is 4 acres. They've acquired 98% of the lands and acreage that they were obligated to do so under the secondary impacts agreement. As was the case a year ago, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to give the money to someone else for the 4 acres, just like it didn't make any sense for them to give the money to somewhere else with regard to the 10 acres. Just over that, the only thing with this slide is you need to be aware that Nevada County has not limited its acquisition in the tier 1 area to the remaining 4 acres. In actuality, it's committed to try to acquire approximately 95 acres in that area. So they're going above and beyond what their obligation is. And they're currently involved in doing title searches for the individual lots and also getting their appraisals updated. So actually, can you bring up the map now?
Yes.
Before I go into staff recommendations?
Yes. Okay, so hold on a second. Okay,
So what I wanted to show you is that in yellow is the area that Atlantic County has been acquiring lands with regard to secondary impact agreement. In gray are the lands that were part of Stockton's acquisition. So as you can see, and the Garden State Parkway is right here. So as you can see, much of the land in this area has now been preserved to prevent any sort of ancillary or associated development with the clover leaf. And
And you can see there, maybe in the darker orange rectangle, that's the lot, the 10-acre lot that the county acquired in the past year. And then anything that's not in color is what they're still working on, basically. You see the little tiny lots, hence the title issues, each one is a challenge. But they've really been able, I mean, they've done an amazing job, they really have, and have made such great progress that. You know, this is exactly what the commission was hoping would occur when that agreement was signed, and the county's really done excellent work, so. We're almost there, but you can really see how it fits in with the larger area, all the lands preserved by Stockton, and anything that's not gray or yellow, but that's colored like kind of a pale minty green, those are other preserved lands in and around the area as well, for various other purposes, so. It's really been a nice, good contiguous area here.
back to the presentation. Okay.
We're challenging today.
Thanks.
Very well. This morning.
obviously, staff is recommending that the commission grant another extension of 24 months for the county to complete.
12 months.
12 months.
Too many numbers.
12 months, excuse me, for them to complete the acquisition of the remaining 4 acres. And that would take them to September 7th of 2024. So this is your resolution to take this into the commission.
Okay, anyone have any questions or comments for Stacy?
I challenge, I have to give Atlantic County a lot of credit. It looks like there are dozens of lots there and owners. This is a really huge process. I understand what it's taking so much time. So, yeah, I think we absolutely should support you doing the right thing for us. We appreciate it. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Does the county have willing sellers with the lots that are being offered are titled?
And you're gonna ask Renee. Renee?
Ooh, there she is.
Hi, good morning. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's because I never use my microphone.
Nah.
There's a reason for that. My question is if the 4 acres that the county's trying to complete, are they willing sellers, but there are title issues with the lots involved? Is that what it is?
It's actually, it's a little bit of everything. First, thank you for the opportunity to participate today. I know I've been before this committee and the commission a couple times on this project. I've been working on it since day one. As Stacy had mentioned, there's roughly 100 lots that are all about 1/3 of an acre each that are still internal to this parcel. We have some title issues because over time, many of the property owners have passed. So now we're dealing with estate situations. We did send out letters of interest previously to the different property owners, and we do have owners who have expressed interest in selling. It's just getting through title issues and things like that. So, you know, also Stacy had mentioned, I mean, 4 acres would satisfy the requirement, but we really want to pick up all of that acreage, which would be about another, 95 acres. So yes, we do have some willing sellers, some we just haven't been able to connect with yet.
So the year would give you time to work on the whole area that was shown on the map, not just to complete the 4 acres.
Correct. Yes, we've actually, when we first started the project, we tried to go out to all of the owners at once, but as you can imagine, that was a bit overwhelming. So now we're phasing the acquisitions, to make them more manageable. And yeah, it would be those 4 acres, probably more within that 1 year.
And the county's passed the ordinance so that it authorizes even if it's just necessary for the title. And the cash is in the bank, so to speak.
And that is, that's a good point that you make, that sometimes you have a willing seller, but because they can't clear title, the only way to acquire the property would be through eminent domain, even if you have a willing seller. So, that I'm sure that there would be instances of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Stacy or Renee?
I just think the county has done an outstanding job in putting this together, and I'd like to move it forward to the full commission.
All right, can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, great. Thank you, Renee. Thank you.
Thank
Stephen.
you.
Thanks for that.
All right. Next up on the agenda, discussion of the Kirkwood Cohensey Water Management MP amendments. And then Sheena and Marcy are here.
Well, I assume it's on the desktop,
Okay.
downloads, it's in downloads apparently.
Okay. Got it. This?
Yep.
Okay, let me screen share that. Will not be phased.
What's that?
I didn't even know about that.
Well, you gotta spring some things. Why not? Good morning. So today we wanted to talk to you about the final steps in the adoption process for the water management rules, otherwise known as the KC rules. I am going to bring you back decades with a review of how we got here. The Gibson bill, which first directed the commission and funded research into the availability of water to supply the needs of our regional growth area and to evaluate the impacts to the other Pinelands resources. Led to all kinds of studies available on our website in case you want to review them. And as a result of all those studies and all that work and stakeholder meetings that fill a file cabinet, the outcome was that the commission needed to amend the water management section of the CMP to set clearer requirements, clearer standards for diversions from the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer. They needed to have specific metrics in there that were objective and not just a word like get close enough. It needed to incorporate the studies that showed an inflection point of 4 inches, where drawdowns of 4 inches or more had increasingly poor results for threatened and endangered species in the Pinelands. So in the rule that we've reviewed a couple times with this committee now, we did those metric changes to the rule, set progressive protections on water diversions from the Kirkwood-Cohansey, depending on which management area the diversion is proposed in. And it only allow withdrawals in our less restrictive management areas. So that is just for background, because it's been a long time. So the amendment history itself, just to review where we've been, the original proposal happened a year ago. We reviewed it with the commission, the committee and the commission, and it was published. We received some comments that required a substantial change, and that related to the non-consumptive use of water by the resource extraction industry. And it took into account comments from DEP that recognize the non-substantial use by resource extraction. So there were other minor technical changes to the rule, correction of words and citations to other DEP rules. So the notice of substantial change was back in April of this year. We had another comment period. I don't remember when that closed, June 3rd, there it is right there. We got 6 additional comments, 6 additional commenters with a number of comments. So here we are today with the final rule proposal for adoption. And this just goes through for you the content of comments that we've received on the substantial change proposal. Most of the substantial change comments said we support these changes. There were additional requests from the resource extraction industry for lightening the burden of the application requirements, I guess is how I would frame it, and indicating that they felt the commission didn't have the authority to review development of the resource. I don't want to read through all these for you, but most of them dealt with the resource extraction industry, interbasin transfers, and lots of things. If you have other comments or questions on those, I would be happy to entertain them, but I don't want to read through all the comments for you. In our response document that is in the adoption package, we note that one of the changes that we've done in the rule proposal is to align the language in the rule proposal from sealed wells to decommissioned wells, which is something DEP did that flew under the radar. And we changed some wording in the response to comments to note that we're looking for a hydrogeologic report from resource extraction industry applications to show that it's non-consumptive, and it has to estimate the volumes of water withdrawn and returned to the source. They were concerned that we were looking for precision specific numbers, and so the response to comments now clarifies it should align with what you provide to DEP for demonstrating that it's a non-consumptive use. So that's what we've done with the document for the adoption package. Did you want to add anything, Marcy?
No.
Don't. Which just leads us to where we are with the adoption now. We have received approval from the governor's office to move forward with the adoption. We are recommending to this committee that they recommend to the full commission that the proposal be adopted. The timeline allows for the governor's office review of the minutes ending on or about November 6th. We would then submit it to the New Jersey Register for publication on November 9th. And that would give us the effective date of the rule December 4th of this year. Yay, everybody cheer. So that's a brief summary of where we are in the adoption process, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Gina and Marcy, and everyone for the incredible amount of work, and, again, it's a theme today. The collaborative nature, with which all of you, all of staff engaged in this process and working with stakeholders and listening to concerns and, working collaboratively as possible with some of those stakeholders to, identify how to help them meet their goals in a way that is still allows us to continue doing what we're trying to do. So thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments on this? Yep.
Gina, if we go back to the point you just made about the water consumption percentage, the applicant only has to estimate, not being really accurate on it. Is there a later point at which the actual amount of water returned is weighed against what the estimation was, so that we know if the estimation was
Accurate?
fair? Well, they're accurate to the extent we're asking for accuracy. Yeah, that it was fair.
No, there's really no point after that. I will say that DEP, the resource extraction industry, and I think we've mentioned this in the past, the resource extraction industry is heavily regulated. So while the commission itself doesn't have the opportunity after the certificate of filing is issued, DEP does follow up and review things. The soil district does follow up and review work on the site. The health department does. There's a number of other agencies who continually visit the site to review their work. So I guess I would hang my hat primarily on DEP for the follow-up on the diversion versus return.
Thank you.
Gina, isn't the water use in resource extraction like the washing gravel and that kind of thing?
Right, so it's actually mostly because they vacuum up the sand and they vacuum up water with the sand. And so it's whatever drains off the dredge. So the sand is vacuumed up and piled on a dredge, and the water drains back off directly into the water. Or when the sand is taken from the dredge and put out to dry, essentially, whatever water remains in the gaps drains back into the ground or overland into the pond again. So it's less about, my understanding is it's less about washing than it is about just that
The way that
they extract it.
Mhm. So that it would be very difficult to somehow record the water usage in that scenario.
Well, they do estimate it, and there are,
Sure.
the water allocation permit reports, which we have and based our revisions on, do go through a process where they say the pump size on the dredge is this size, and they run it for 8 hours, and the evaporation rate and blah, blah, blah. So it's,
But it isn't like the returned water goes through a meter of some.
absolutely not.
You know, guess, and, not a guess, but an estimation.
Approximation, yep,
Okay, that's all, thanks.
okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, hearing none, can I get a motion and a second to recommend this to the full commission?
I'll move it.
Thank you.
Second it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, great, thanks again, Gina and Marcy, thank you very much. All right, Sue. Next up is Sue to talk about FY 23 accomplishments and the FY 24 committee work plan for this group.
More work for Paul. So it's budget time. Probably now, end of the fiscal year, budgeting for fiscal year 24. Draft budgets are being prepared for the personnel budget committee to discuss next Tuesday. And in order to do the budget, we have to put together sort of a work plan overall for all of the staff and the commission. And then I tried to, as we did last year, try to break that down a little bit so that we can talk to this committee about work and initiatives that this committee will be involved with for this fiscal year 24. So you're not going to see the entire work plan that we're proposing today. You'll just see the portion that this committee would be involved with. And then when we get to the full commission meeting in September and consideration of the budget, we'll do a fuller proposal of all the different things that the staff will be doing during the year. So to sort of start out with, I thought I'd go back to this time last year when we put together a work plan for this committee that you all discussed, and we have been doing our best to implement over the last year and show you what's been accomplished over the last year. This was a really interesting thing that I don't think we do enough of this. We look back to see exactly, well, what happened. We have all these goals and ideas and projects, and what happened to all of them, where things stand. It was very valuable for me to look back because it's easy to get frustrated throughout the year. Why can't we get anything done? We have all these problems, lack of staff, all kinds of stuff. But when you look back and all, start, you realize how much we actually, this committee and the staff and the commission as a whole really did accomplish during what was a very challenging fiscal year. So I'm hoping you'll have the same feelings about this as I do towards the end of the presentation. So these are the things that we discussed with the committee last year as part of the P&I committee's work plan. Land preservation wise, we propose to hold our first ever land preservation summit and launch a new acquisition round using Pinelands Conservation Fund monies. We held the summit in March. It was a great success. We ultimately decided to postpone launching a new land acquisition round. The timing just wasn't right. We felt we needed to do a little more thinking about policies and priorities and coordination with some of our preservation partners before we ventured into that world again. But you'll see in the fiscal year 24 work plan, we do have a proposal for how to proceed with land acquisition. But the summit was held, it was great. We had lots of great coordination, learned a lot that we can use going forward with our own land acquisition activities. Landfill closure assessments, 2 were completed for Woodbine and Berkeley, the municipal landfills. Ultimately, the commission approved the closure plans, the capping plans for both of those landfills. Edwin Gresky, when he was still here, made a presentation in February on the landfill closure capping analysis and process that we've developed over the past year. So that will be carried forward and review of future landfill closure proposals. Septic pilot program, of course, continues. It just churns along. Ed also made a report, comprehensive report on that pilot program in February. Staff continues to review development applications as they come in, proposing the use of our pilot program systems or any alternate design system, both for residential and we have a few for commercial development. So that's just an ongoing effort there. We talked a lot with you about our permanent land protection database that was developed using National Park Service funding. It is up and running and being maintained and used all the time. It's a wonderful thing to be able to look up and find the information you need right away. We use that database to generate our annual permanent land protection presentation to the commission last October. We'll be doing that again this October, another year's worth of data and updates coming soon. These are all, I didn't mention at the beginning, these first projects are all funded through the Pinelands Conservation Funds. That's kind of how this is organized. Here's one that I don't need to talk about because you all just did it. I'm very happy that we're at this point with these rules at long last. We have other rules that we are continuing to work on. I will say that the Kirkwood Comanche rule process, because it involves an additional reproposal and adoption notice and hearings and public comment, did occupy more time than we had expected during the year and has somewhat affected our ability to make a lot of progress on other rules. But we did draft language. We have shared some of that with you over the last year related to the right-of-way pilot program and our vegetation management standards, along with rules to offer greater protection to the Black Run watershed. We talked with you about that in April. We are busily working on formal language, rule language, and all of the data to support both of those rules. We have other rules in progress as well. We know we need to make some tweaks and improvements, if you will, in our cluster development rules in the forest and rural development areas. We're still working on those. The rule language is not finalized yet. The Pinelands Development Credit Program rule language has been drafted again to just sort of recognize what municipalities are doing these days in terms of PDCs. Increased densities, recognizing affordable housing, shifting PDC obligations from residential to non-residential development. You've all been involved with that during the past year. So the rules need to be, I think that needs to be reflected in the rules as some of the options that municipalities have in terms of meeting their PDC obligations through their zoning plans, provided certain key standards are met, of course. We are continuing to finalize our PDC supply and demand numbers. Very important component of the PDC program is maintaining an appropriate balance between supply and demand. As you might imagine, you know, with 1 million acres, it's not easy to make these estimates and to look at all of these numbers and acreages formula that go into this. But we are determined that that will also be ready to present to the commission in October, so you can see what the numbers look like, and then we can go from there in terms of, is there anything the commission needs to do in terms of rulemaking or anything else in order to maintain that balance going forward. We are now, we have created an active, if you will, active projects spreadsheet that shows all these projects that are in various stages of our application procedures that propose the use or will need the use of PDCs, just trying to get a handle on, you know, today's active demand a little bit better. So that is actually something we have created that's been very useful. Infrastructure Trust Fund. We've got 4 projects that are active still that the commission allocated grant and loan funding to through the Infrastructure Trust Fund. Got a couple that were particularly active during this past year. We've been communicating closely with DEP and the Attorney General's office on how best to get some of these projects through the various processes. We have water projects for the first time, not just sewer, and that's produced some administrative hurdles that we've had to sort of coordinate and work our way through. The state has appropriated the funding for these projects, which is good news. Actually, that bill was adopted. Correct. This is an update that is as of June 30th. We just haven't met since then. So but more good things have happened since then. And so when that bill was adopted by the legislature, signed by the governor, we continue to work with the iBank. We understand they're going to be, DEP is going to be perhaps proposing rules to address the funding of water projects in the coming year. And we'll be working with them on that. We anticipate that this committee will be charged with implementing recommendations that come from the climate committee at some point. We have the climate committee has a number of things underway, including the imaginary boundary assessment, which we'll be talking to the committee about in September. At the committee's July meeting, there were presentations made on a dual use agrivoltaics pilot program being developed by BPU. We will be working with BPU further on that and trying to determine how best the commission can be involved with that project. And then, of course, participating on the State Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, preparing resilience action plans, and just generally being involved in all of the state's climate related efforts, some of which may lead to rulemaking, hard to tell at this point, but that would be something that would then come to this committee to address. We talked a little bit a few months ago about our projects that we'll be working on that are funded using our National Park Service economic monitoring grants. Is busily at work on some of these, but it's time for the 5-year report on all of the various statistics that we gather data on for all of our municipalities. Some of it's municipality based, we've done all kinds of data, all these, I forget how many of these statistics there are,
22.
22 at this point. So that is underway, and the report we anticipate will be issued in about a year or so, next year. We're gathering data, identifying data, gathering data on our economy of parks and open space study. I'm sure we'll be discussing that with this committee over the next year. We completed the excavation of the Brotherton Reservation, or at least the work that was planned for the last fiscal year. Scenic byway, very little has happened in terms of the byway other than just some general support and coordination with DOT over the last year. We had thought about hiring a consultant to develop an app for your cell phone if you're driving around on the byway that would sort of guide you and identify resources along the way. That's been in our plans for a couple of years now. Ultimately, we decided to abandon that. It could be very expensive, take quite a bit of time. And the thought was we would focus our efforts elsewhere in terms of the byway and try to do some other projects. Just didn't seem to pan out. We got kind of a wild range of estimates as to cost. Just didn't seem like a great use of the NPS money. So we're going to be doing some other projects. We did some other projects during the year, historic cemetery mapping using our ground penetrating radar system. Some work commenced actually in June on one of those. We held a highly successful archaeological symposium, our second symposium last November. It's a great thing. It was full, packed full of people for that. That was really great. And then other things that we had on the work plan and where they stand. I mentioned more rulemaking. We are continuing to refine and draft amendments to deal with some procedural issues that have been identified over a long period of time. We talked about these application fee related changes to deal with violations, expiration dates for certain old documents, old waivers, very old certificates of filing. These things come back to life and they're 20, 30 years old. Looking at fees for wetlands letters of interpretations and other waiver applications. So all of that, something Marcy's been working on with me and drafting rules and all the rule proposal language to go along with those things. So we've made a lot of progress on that. Stormwater ordinances, you've heard us talk about that multiple times. You've seen the ordinance on the commission agenda. Brad and Katie have been focused on making sure all of our municipalities adopt the model stormwater ordinance to bring them into compliance with the CMP. We have very few left, they're almost all done. So that's good. We talked to the committee about our participation in New Jersey Forest Stewardship Task Force. Robin came and gave presentations to this committee about our involvement there on the policy recommendations that we submitted to the task force. So that work was completed, and I think we're all still waiting for the final, any kind of legislation or anything that is going to come out of the task force. We anticipated perhaps receiving a proposed amendment to our local communications facility comprehensive plan, or cell tower plan, as we like to call it. We did not receive an amendment proposal, but in anticipation of that, we were successful in issuing an RFP to hire a consultant, a radio frequency consultant, to help us with review of any amendments that do walk in the door. We did hire Dr. Eisenstein and his colleagues to work on that with us should we receive an amendment proposal in the future. I think it's a five-year contract or so. We're prepared now, which makes me happy to know that we'll be ready when the amendment comes our way. Stockton University, that's something, a couple of presentations made to this committee. They have a new 2020 facilities master plan that they adopted and submitted to the commission. We've identified, as you know, a number of issues with development that's occurred or is being proposed within the area that's already been deed restricted. We showed you on the exit 44 map all those gray areas that were surrounding the Stockton campus. All these lands that have been deed restricted years ago, but we did identify the problem of existing and planned infrastructure. Roads, for example, were not cut out of the deed restriction, and so now when work needs to occur or they need to be expanded, we've got all kinds of issues. So that's something this committee reviewed. We looked at a map of where the deed restriction changes could and should occur. Stockton has submitted its formal, I guess amendment, right, or an amendment request to DEP to modify the deed restriction. That happened in June. I don't know that we know exactly how long it might take DEP to get through that process. But we're trying to stay involved with that so that we, at some point, will come back to this committee with a recommendation for approval of the master plan and the changes to deed restriction. In the meantime, Stockton has been submitting information to our regulatory program staff on a variety of applications. Some of them will resolve outstanding violations where work occurred without application. Others will need to kind of be put on hold until the deed restriction issue is resolved. But there has been significant progress, which is a good thing. Commission approved an amendment to the memorandum of agreement with Atlantic County related to Lake Lenape. If you recall, that was all about the reconfiguration of the dock and again modifying the deed restriction that had been put in place years ago. The county has initiated that amendment process again with DEP to amend the deed restriction, and we're trying to do our best to keep track of that and don't really have a time frame, but it's underway, which is good news. We just talked about the secondary impacts agreement for interchange 44. It was a year ago, almost today, a year ago, that this committee and the commission ultimately granted a one-year extension. We just recommended another one-year extension, but obviously progress has been made. They had 14 acres at this time last year. Now we're down to 4. Also with MOAs, we had hoped to be able to spend some time reviewing a number of our very old MOAs with DEP and coming up with some recommended updates. That really did not, and you'll see why in a little while, that really did not, we weren't able to spend much time on that. Still in the back of our minds is something that would be helpful, but we've not made any real progress on that effort in the past year. We were also planning to review and respond to rulemaking by other agencies. That did happen. BPU rules and JDEP's rules, their PAC rulemaking process the new stormwater amendments that DEP just adopted, all that was reviewed and we could provide comments. Here's why we didn't do certain things, because we always in our work plans have an unanticipated projects category, because we know that things will come up during the year. That we either will have to, we're required to respond to, or we feel that we should be able to accommodate that they're good projects. And the commission decides they want to move forward. So the first one there, you're all well aware of. We received requests from both Pemberton and Stafford Township for memorandum of agreement to deal with accessible trails and wetlands buffers. So we are busily at work on both of those. And they are somewhat time consuming. Memorandum of agreement are not simple documents. There's lots of information that we need to go that gets put into that, so that when the commission approves those documents, the projects, you'll be aware of exactly what the project entails and it can proceed. So they are both in process. During the year, we identified a grant opportunity under the America the Beautiful program, federal grants. We did put together a proposal that related to land stewardship of properties that the commission has funded through the Pinelands Conservation Fund, acquisition of properties that we contribute funding towards. Sadly, we were notified in June that our proposal was not selected for funding in this round. But we will continue to look for other opportunities to get involved with that process and with that funding. Big thing that happened during the past year or so was a lot of municipal requests to rezone, if you will, in their regional growth areas to accommodate warehouse type development. That's something we discussed with this committee. We had to develop an approach to work with these towns. We decide whether this is something the commission could accommodate and how best to do that. So that was a discussion we had with this committee late 2022, I'll say. It's since been implemented in 2 municipalities, Waterford and Monroe Townships, and the commission has approved those development plans. And then another thing that was brought to our attention during the year was altering vehicle legislation and the work of a couple of municipalities in the Pinelands to adopt ordinances to implement that legislation. That's something we came and talked to the PNI committee about in March. So we're doing some research and looking at getting involved in providing our own ordinances to deal with that matter. And then those are the projects, if you will, more project-oriented things that we worked on during the year. And then just to give you a snapshot of our ongoing municipal conformance work during the fiscal year, we received 171 municipal master plans and ordinances to review. Some of them, like Bass River, were huge. There were entire zoning codes. Others were, just very simple amendments that really ran the gamut. 144 of those were reviewed and determined to raise no issues or no substantial issues, and were allowed to take effects. 8 required formal commission review and approval, and they all came through this committee. You can see the redevelopment plan is a common linkage there. That is, for better or worse, how many municipalities are dealing with zoning changes these days. So you see the number of them from many of our regional growth area municipalities, and in one case, Southampton Township, the Red Lion Diner redevelopment plan and rural development area. Yeah, so that's it. So that's my recap of what the staff and this committee accomplished during fiscal year 23. I think it's an impressive body of work, given the small staff that we have to work on these matters these days. And I want to share with you some thoughts about fiscal year 24. So you can get an idea of what, in some cases, we're already doing because it's already August, so we're 2 months into the fiscal year. It just keeps going. And give you all an opportunity to see this that we're proposing and talk about what other ideas or suggestions you have, things you'd like the staff to focus on. we just keep talking. Here's what we anticipate coming up probably during this fiscal year. In terms of municipal conformance, you'll see Bath River's on the list there. Very happy that we're nearing conclusion of that little project, but we have a number of other things in the works, some of which are redevelopment plans, others are zoning map changes that we've either been working with or talking to municipalities about for years, or we're surprised that we didn't know about, and now we're reviewing. Some of these are quite complicated. And all will be brought before this committee at some point if the adoption proceeds. You'll see down there at the bottom, the last two. Stormwater implementing ordinances. Yes, we are nearly done having our municipalities adopt the Pinelands model stormwater permit. However, DEP just adopted amendments.
Right.
And so we have to revise our model ordinances now and go back to all of our towns and have them adopt an amended version. So that's another round of work on stormwater ordinances that will need to occur. And then the other side of that is currently sitting over there, regulatory programs is going to have to start implementing the new amended stormwater rules at some point. So we're trying to figure that part of the process out as well. And then cannabis facility ordinances, I mentioned that we saw some early on. And we're now seeing sort of some of the towns are rethinking now. They've had a little bit of an opportunity to think about what they want to permit and where. So we're seeing a little bit of that, where towns are going back to their original cannabis ordinance and making some revisions and refinements to permit facilities in some locations. And so we'll be working on those municipalities to make sure that the different types of cannabis facilities end up being permitted in the correct management areas and zoning districts. Amendments, rulemaking, none of this is new. We are still, as I said hundreds of times, rulemaking is a lengthy process. We're nearing the end for the coherency rules, which is excellent news. Once they're adopted and in effect, there's the implementation part of that, where we need to make sure that when applications come to the door in the future under those new rules, everybody knows the questions to ask, the application requirements have to be met. We do have, if you'll recall, an agreement with USGS to review certain elements of these applications and the modeling that will be required for new applications for wells and diversions. So that will be adoption is the necessary step that needs to occur, and then implementation will occur over certainly the rest of the fiscal year. We hope to proceed with formal rule proposals for this committee to review for a variety of amendments already talked about: vegetation management, checking the Blackstone watershed, expiration of old approvals and documents, application fee increases, violations, letters of interpretation. We have some other amendments that are as far along in our drafting process, cluster development I mentioned. And at some point, this committee and the full commission will need to get back to addressing and coming up with rules for what we call the gap approval process, which deals with projects that are private development projects that don't receive any municipal approvals. So they don't come before the commission, they're not public development projects, they're private development projects. I'm hoping you all know what I'm referring to in terms of pipelines and electric transmission lines, things like that, where they fall into what we call a gap. They're not really private, they're not really public, municipalities don't get to review them, there's no approval for the commission to review, coming up with a process to address those. We have had draft rules a couple times to discuss with the committee and for various reasons and sort of put those on hold, but it's not something we can continue to ignore. We need to come up with a process and put that into the CFP. So hopefully we can make some progress on that this fiscal year. Again, recommendations from the planning committee on whatever that might be. We're going to continue working on these MOAs and agency plans that I've mentioned: Stockton, exit 44 of the Parkway, the accessible trails MOA. We've got Pemberton and Stafford listed on here, but you see that other municipalities, we already know of one, they haven't formalized their proposal, so we have not started down the 13-step MOA process yet. But I anticipate that we will be doing that during this fiscal year, and there may perhaps be other municipalities that come forward with these similar proposals as well. I've got South Jersey Transportation Authority listed on here because we know that they are going to be coming back to the commission with requests for an amendment potentially to a very old MOA dealing with the Atlantic City Expressway. We're going to continue working with them to make sure that all the requirements in the MOA for the airport are met and implemented along the way. So that would certainly require some time and attention. And then again, we do really want to start taking a look at some of the old, very old MOAs with DEP on forestry, or wetlands permitting, or CAFRA reviews and coordination. There's a lot of, and it's long past time that we sort of try to tackle at least one of them. I'm hoping in this next fiscal year. We have our new economic monitoring projects. I mentioned most of these. The reporting, our economy of open space study, historic cemetery mapping. New this year, over the next year, we'll be working on development of what we're calling the local conformance and zoning system, much like we did putting together a permanent land protection database. It's a long past time that we tackle and update our very old conformance tracking system, where we keep track of municipal ordinances and master plans and where they are in the process. And our zoning system, which is pretty old, still useful, but pretty old at this point. It's designed to provide staff with the ability to look up any municipal zoning district and see immediately what's permitted and what are the lot size requirements and what are the PDC requirements. It's time to modernize and make that easier to use, more helpful, and hopefully at the end of the day, available publicly as well, so that it will answer a lot of the questions and phone calls and emails we get from people. What's my zoning? What does it mean? They'll be able to use this just like we will. So that'll be a multi-year project, but we're going to get started this year. And then at the bottom there, something we did talk briefly with the committee about a few months ago. We hope to be able to conduct a field school in association with Monmouth University on a Native American site. So that'll be something that's underway during the fiscal year, if we're lucky enough to secure permission to do that at a particular site. We're very hopeful. We'll see. Other things, additional projects and initiatives. I mentioned land acquisition. We do hope to launch a new acquisition round in late spring. We're going to have our second annual permanent land protection summit. We're going to continue to coordinate with DEP. I expect that summit and what we learn, we'll be using that when we come back to this committee to talk about land acquisition priorities, funding policies, ways of tweaking, improving our land acquisition program, how we can be more helpful in facilitating new projects in the areas that we're seeking to preserve. And then in blue there, which I think I used blue to show you sort of new things. We are planning in this fiscal year to launch on sort of a small scale an effort to go take a look at what's been happening on some of the properties that the commission has helped to preserve through the Pinelands Conservation Fund, with a stewardship focus, sort of monitoring. We're going to go out, look at the sites, wander around, take some photos, put together some kind of reporting on what's happening, what are the problems, what's looking good, what do these largely nonprofit organizations need in terms of help with stewardship and maintaining these properties. So we're hoping that will, on a small scale, help us inform, future acquisition rounds, maybe even the beginning of a larger grant proposal. We'll see. But that was definitely stewardship of preserved lands was definitely one of the major themes that came out of the Land Preservation Summit. And so we'd like to kind of do some of our own work on that and see what we can find out. We do anticipate receiving at least one proposed amendment to our comprehensive sell plan during this year. I don't think it's gonna be a big one, but it'll have a couple of new. Here, I suspect. We're gonna continue monitoring our infrastructure trust fund projects and working with DEP, particularly to review any new proposed rules they come out with related to funding. And then the big one on the bottom there in blue. It's getting close to being time for the municipalities to do another round of affordable housing. I feel like we just finished the last one, but it's been years. So 2025 is the day on which they're gonna need to do updated housing elements and fair share plans and take another look at their settlement agreements they have in place. We need to think a little bit about what does the commission need to do to be prepared for that? More amendments, more redevelopment plans, requests for data on vacant land, all kinds of things could happen. So we're going to be doing a lot of thinking and preparation. We've recently begun having regular coordination meetings with the fair share housing people, fair share housing center. To sort of just try to stay on track with them, what they're doing, and it's been a good thing. We've learned things from them. They've learned things from us, and about specific municipalities or redevelopment activities, but also just more in general about what's going to happen next. What's going to happen with the next round? Nobody seems to really know, but we're going to do our best to stay informed.
It's unclear whether the judiciary will continue its process.
Yeah. Or whether
POA will be reestablished. I mean, it's sort of scary. 2025 is really not that far.
No,
it's not, and
a little over here.
And
here's
no
one
judgments.
of the big questions I keep asking is, well, who's keeping track of all these individual settlement agreements were signed? And the court was involved, and now is anybody keeping track of implementation of those settlement agreements? Are projects getting approved, and are they getting built? And the answer is kind of some, but it's like hit or miss. So that'll be interesting to see if we can carve out a role for the commission. Can we be helpful? Can we provide data? Can we provide information? And always our goal is to make sure that any new plans or agreements that are signed are going to be consistent with the CMP. You know, stay in the regional growth areas or Pinelands towns. That's been successful. We really haven't had an issue with municipalities or anybody proposing development of these projects outside our growth areas, which is very good news. But what else can we do, and what do we need to prepare for in the next round to be determined? Well, here's one. I was hoping that was last. So I know. So the PDC program, we have the top there. I mentioned completing our supply and demand methodologies and estimates. Once we finish that and we produce current estimates, that's not really the end. We need to have something that we can reproduce on a regular basis in terms of supply and demand to make sure that our balance is appropriate as time goes by. It is definitely time to pursue legislative changes for the PDC bank. We assumed administrative responsibilities in 2011 for the bank. However, the bank's legislation has not been changed. It's still the bank under that legislation is still housed in the Department of Banking and Insurance, not here with the commission. The board is very, very, very inactive. They've met once in 10 years, something like that. And just needs to be reconstituted with the commission in mind, that the bank is here now. We drafted legislation years ago to make some of these changes and kind of abandon that. But I think it's time to do that again. And just to recognize where the bank belongs, how it should function. There are some additional changes that we would recommend in terms of the bank authorities. We often get requests from builders. Couldn't I just come to the bank to buy my PDCs? That would be so much easier than having to contact 5 different, make deals with 5 different private PDC owners. That's not something the bank has the authority to do right now. But it's an interesting concept that we would like to explore, just to make the program function more smoothly. And so funding is required, we're gonna buy PVCs to then resell them, you know, so there's a number of factors. But, we are gonna try and pursue that. We're gonna continue to review other state agency rules, of course. DEP, we are waiting, you know, larger climate change rules. We haven't seen anything, but we assume they're working on them still. EPU may have other rulemaking. State Ag Development Committee has recently adopted its soil disturbance rule. States say that has any impact or any concerns that we might have, or adopted, right, or proposed. So we're looking at those to see if we need to make any comments. And also in blue there, that's the dual use solar pilot program I mentioned before that the climate committee's heard some about. How that fits in with our own solar energy facility standards. In some cases it does, in other cases it doesn't. We're going to be continuing to coordinate with VPU. In fact, we'll be meeting with them next week. They're coming here to visit. We're going to talk about their plans for their pilot program, their waiver process, the commission's role. And I think they also wanted to talk about the community solar program and its implementation in Pinelands. So I think this will be a good opportunity for both of us to learn from each other on our procedures and process and how they review applications versus how we do. So that would be a good effort. It might be the last one. ORV, last but not least, ORV and ATV issues, what can I mention too? I mentioned the model ordinances. We're going to be working on that to distribute some guidance and suggestions to our municipalities in terms of actions that they can take. And then I put this one on here, which is something that JB is going to be working on, which is I find fascinating, development of a methodology to assess restoration costs for damaged habitats. So it's vegetation we're talking about, and can we help to come up with a, you know, to quantify what would it cost? What are the damages in terms of money that are caused by illegal ORV activity in our state forests, and is there a way to quantify that so that the state could use that information to assess penalties, fines, whatever, or court. I mean, there's all kinds of different uses for it. So I'm hoping to work on that this year as well. And there's this one, my favorite. Right? All kinds of things that you don't expect can come up. This past year it was accessible trails MOA. We didn't anticipate that. And a variety of other things. So there will always be something. So that's what we have on the list. Again, those are only the things that sort of relate to this committee. There are many, many more projects that the staff as a whole will be working on that don't come before this committee. There'll be many challenges during the year, one of which is fortunately, fingers crossed, we're going to be receiving a nice grant from the New Jersey Historic Trust for renovation of Fenwick Manor, stabilization of Fenwick Manor, which will require evacuation from Fenwick Manor for some period of time, housing of staff in other locations, and a lot of work with whatever consultant, engineers, builders that we need to hire to do the work on Fenwick Manor, and that will require significant upheaval of the staff over there and a lot of time and energy spent administering that process and making sure that everything gets done. So that's a big one that I wanted to mention because it keeps slipping my mind, and then I think, oh, well, it's not just getting the money, it's, you know, we have a lot of, it's a major project, major undertaking that will involve a lot of staff. So just mention that. An example of something else will be hopefully good. But anyway, but that was a lot, but I am interested in hearing other ideas you all have or requests or any feedback. This is not the last time to talk about this or request, you know, that the staff you know, take on projects or you know, work on other initiatives, but I am interested in hearing from you all what else you would like the staff to be focusing on for the next year.
Thank you very much. I would just want to point out, you know, again, today is how incredible staff is. These are special projects and initiatives, right? That all of this work is on top of the day-to-day work that the staff does. So you know, just again, a kudos to the team and Susan, your leadership, because you know, we all agree that was a pretty incredible list. And again, it's on top of just the day-to-day operations, application reviews, talking to the, you know, folks who put in applications and all of it. You know, so it's just really incredible work again, that you all are doing. So very, very thankful for that. Anyone have any questions, comments, for Susan? Go ahead, Mark.
They know I'm always open, but yes, I have to compliment you too, Sue. That was a truly comprehensive list. And it occurs to me that we're really working hard, not just to deal with issues that we already know are on the table and we've been trying to get at over time, but a lot of it is work that you're doing to anticipate problems that are going to come forward and to address them before they're on our table, so people can recognize that we try to deal with them objectively and not subjectively in view of whatever applications in front of us at the time. So, for example, the idea of trying to come up with clearer gap approval process for the gap projects
Before the next one.
before the next one, which will be those are always controversial projects, and you can't talk about them, not with any kind of satisfaction of the public or with all the commissioners. So I think it's great you're doing that. And despite the fact that you've shown us a really full dance card, and I hate to add to it, but I do have one suggestion. And that is an issue, talk about controversial issues that have come up a few times for us in the past 5 or 6 years. To me, it's discussion with our colleagues in the DEP of wildfire management policy. I don't know whether that's already the subject of an older MOA, maybe it is, but I know that in the past several years, when we've had representatives of the Forest Fire Service or other divisions of DEP come here to talk to us about approvals that they need with regard to fire towers or visibility around fire towers or forest thinning with regard to wildfire management. I think we would do so much better if we could talk to them about those things, the policies behind those things before the actual application comes up, so we can discuss them objectively and with thoughtful deliberation, take the time needed. And I'm especially one who believes that there are a lot of new technology answers that might be helpful. It's so far, it seems to me DEP's been resistant to, and I wish we could talk about them. So that would be the one to give you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions?
So the PDC law changes, is that process died for lack of sponsor?
Yeah. I'll say that was one of the issues. But I think I have some ideas in mind for that. We might be able to address that.
It's lack of sponsor, was lack of any sort of momentum in the legislature.
Well, I think also there is a funding component,
Absolutely.
and that may be difficult, because if the idea is that the bank could be authorized to buy and sell PDCs, be more like a clearinghouse, then funding is required so that the bank can purchase PDC. We don't have any money. The bank has $0. And so that may be one of the issues.
You could act as a clearinghouse if there was a process where the owners of PDC would register them and authorize you to act as their agent. And that would involve an
That could be
acquisition.
done, right? That wouldn't require additional funding perhaps, but it would require authorization to do something like that. I think.
Right, and also there's probably legal liability issues.
So, there's sort of the the administrative stuff for the bank that I think that the legislation would address without a lot of controversy, just that it's part of the commission and the membership of the board and all of that could be addressed through one bill, if you will, and then there's the more, what other authorities do you want to give to the bank? What kind of rules on the bank?
Unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, we're going to be going into window after the election. So whatever is currently in the hopper with regard to legislation has to get through the finish line for the end of the year, and then everything will be set and everything will be reintroduced. So in some ways, it's a good opportunity because everything will be new. In other ways, there's going to just be a lot of new. So how do you look at this shiny object over here, now this shiny object over here. And a lot of that, I think, is dependent upon the sponsor. We've always been a little hesitant. We really don't get to lobby. So it's really up to the sponsor to go out there and say, this is important.
Well, just to make the bank work seems to me to be important, and
It is.
I don't ever hesitate to lobby.
I mean, another opportunity too is, to work through maybe the majority of the staff, right? Because if it's, something that you can talk to with folks there on a policy level, they can help with that process and keep it moving and sponsor educational elections.
There's 7 counties, and they have legislated, and certainly some of it.
I have worked through my doors, but
Bring
And anyone, we're not. Anybody can do it, you can.
but I would suggest that we have the language drafted.
You have
Because
to
you
do it.
don't want local government services to do it this.
Now, we've always taken it
That's
we
enough.
want to tweak some of it because it's hard in a couple of years.
But it's largely written, it's just getting through the process.
Do these amendments to the development easements that the Stockton and Atlantic County, do they have to go through the State House Commission?
No, they don't.
Okay, that's
all you want to.
that's all I wanted.
The answer is no.
Did they give a reason why we didn't get these stewardship ones? You don't let me talk about land protection.
No, you can talk about it. Did they tell us why they didn't select their pre-proposal?
Just the huge quantity of, there were thousands of applications for that funding, and that's the only reason they gave us.
So when we do make grants, if we start making grants again, do we ask about particularly a nonprofit's ability to provide stewardship?
That was always part of the funding ranking criteria. So before I took it over, it was part of the consideration. We kind of elevated it. The P&I committee elevated it during 2020, maybe, when we refocused the criteria for ranking. So yes, it's always been part of the consideration.
So sometime next budget or next work year, plan year, we're going to probably have completed 2 MOAs on accessible trails. Would it be less staff intensive if we took the experience of reviewing those MOAs and changed the regulations? So we didn't have to go through the 13-step MOA process.
Well, hopefully we're gonna learn stuff. Maybe that's one of the things will come out of it, saying we should change our understanding. I don't know.
Or just specifically to accessible trails.
Perhaps, right?
You know,
Yeah.
Or it's not, right? Right. Well, right, if nothing else, we'll have developed a template for future MOA, but perhaps it could evolve.
The MOA process, as we all know, is very vague. You touched on this in your presentation. Does anybody count the actual affordable units that get built?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think the application only will provide the opportunity to work affordable, not to necessarily build.
I know, but once, I mean, assuming the project gets built,
That's one.
No
of the
one-
things
no
that
one knows.
There.
and no one knows how long they stay for.
Well, there's all kinds of agreements and administrative agreements that are signed. There's language in the deeds that require, you know, that they be maintained as a floodplain for a certain number of years. But there's
regulations that pertain to that.
Yeah, there are, and I think it's municipalities that have to adopt and administer these. Yeah, but it's, we're gonna learn, we're gonna see what we can find out.
I don't know that we need, I think just, touching base with the agencies that do it, especially. Another round, at some point, it seems to me that the growth areas and Pinelands for affordable housing is allowed. Maybe have to say that's enough, there isn't any more, particularly the way it's done, where it's based on a percentage, so to get 20 affordable units, you have to approve 100.
Yeah.
There might be a limit. And my last question is, I assume that we have sufficient information on Black Run watershed to support redesignating the zone, the capability now. So if we did that, if we did in Worcester Creek, then the burden would be on municipalities to conform to that change and take,
That's correct.
free up some time.
Yes,
So that would be my recommendation.
right, so there are different, simpler approaches to protection of the Black Lung watershed that we could explore. That we'll come back and talk to this committee about hopefully in the near future.
I mean, how long is this? I mean, this was done in 2005, wasn't this in the
Yeah.
Tom's River Corridor?
Yeah, it was right afterwards, right after something. Yeah, it's been a long time. And yes, there's a wealth of data to support down zoning or redesignation of the Black Lung watershed for sure. It's what else, if anything, does the commission want to do along with that? I mean, that's enough.
So, one of the concerns I have about the approach that we've been taking is that, and you can't help it, but the staff gets invested in the recommendations that are going around through the town to implement the changes. And the other way, you've got to layer back where you're reviewing what they propose, not helping them propose it. I guess is the best way. That's all I have. Thank you for.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sue.
Anybody else? Questions? Comments? Go ahead, Sharon.
First of all, compliment the executive director for putting together such a comprehensive program. And quite frankly, I hesitate to even say anything, but more on your plate.
You're gonna do it anyway. I'm talking I'm with myself up.
I would like to see us increase speed for off-road vehicle use. Enduro race particularly. I don't think $200 covers, a permit for those events. And I'd like to see that increase. Particularly, Commissioner Lobauer's point showed that a lot of vehicles were out of state. And I think we need to increase that. Fee. I'm amazed that a lot of our staff's time is consumed by items not of our doing. Brought to the staff because of a reaction to someone else's need. And so in a way to try to help staff get more time to devote to things that staff needs to do and things that perhaps commissioners need to do. Someone calls and says, Director Ruby, can I put a house on the lot? well, I don't even come to you with the zone, I don't come to you with, any information. So I'm wondering if we could, come up with a template, a question here, before I can answer that, Peachtree, here, I need all of this information. Because I think the municipality has dumped a lot of that on you folks. You know, they call the zoning officer, oh, I don't know, this finance problem, call them. And so perhaps if we had a, here, before I can answer that, fill out this information sheet. I would be better able to handle your issue.
So you really hit on, maybe not through this committee is involved,
No.
which is why you didn't see it here, but one of the major issues we are having, there's a variety of reasons why. One is, just the staff shortage in general and our ability to respond to these things, but you're right. And something I've thought about for years now is that we're forced into a very reactionary position. Leaves us very little time to be proactive. Like you mentioned, we're trying, but it's hard to free up the time for that. On the application side of the world, you're absolutely right. We need to figure out ways to lessen the burden on our regulatory program staff who are bombarded with emails and phone calls all the time. Whether they're sent here by the zoning officer who says, I don't know, contact the commission, realtors, very common. Can I build on this lot? I need to know by 5 o'clock today. That kind of thing can drive you crazy. So we are doing some things. We have our interactive map, which we've shown the commission that has been very helpful. We've made some improvements there. The local conformance and zoning system development is somewhat designed to get to that point of, look right here, it'll tell you everything you need to know. Here's the map. You can look up your lot, you can see if you have wetlands, you can see the zoning, it'll link to, here's all the information on the zoning that you need. So there's that. I am hopeful that during this year, rather than having our usual annual general municipal officials orientation session, we didn't do that this year. I'm hoping we're gonna have a more targeted series of those events, if you will. The first one I would do is with municipal zoning officers.
Each municipality has a Pinelands,
Most of them have like local review officers. Here's the mapping that we made available that you can use. Here's how you use it. Here are the questions, you need to be able to answer about your own zoning. So that's all sort of in the works as well. To try and free up time for the regulatory program staff to review applications.
Right.
Which seems silly to say because that's, their main job, but it's very difficult when you just have an overwhelming amount of things flooding in. What about this? Can I do that? Did you review this? I sent it to you this morning. Why haven't you answered it? It's very,
I'm sure.
so we're working on some of that that we hope to address.
I'd like to second Commissioner Avery's thought process with PDC and certainly support attempting to move that bank over to jurisdiction. My last item is second to last item. I'd like to see us improve our definition in the CMP because I think sometimes the CMP is not kept pace with current definitions. Horizontal directional drilling, redevelopment, cannabis. What's the distribution? And so because of those things, we don't have a clear definition. We wind up generating a lot of time trying to convince an applicant why we need to monitor their effort. And the last item would be regarding PPCs. I'd like to see us look at extension of sewer lines, extension of water lines that would cause additional development in undeveloped areas. The municipality should be required to buy PDCs to accommodate that, because ultimately, if that development occurs, we lose the benefit of getting any PVCs. And what do we do with the municipality that, the case that we're involved in, where the municipality just willy-nilly issued permits for recycling in a well? Is there anything that we should do to, indicate to a municipality, we're not gonna, review your applications as long as these outstanding violations occur in your municipality?
Well, I mean.
And thank you, I'm
Yeah.
sorry I took so long.
No, I mean, and. The number of thoughts, but one particular address the violation, if we, the CMP does give the staff the authority to say. Until you completed an application and resolved your violation, we can't approve anything else here. We do that. And so I think the one you're referring to, if I'm right, is, we've worked our way through that process and they're finally at the point now saying, these are the violations, here's how we're addressing them. And the commission will do that. But, so we do try, we have those provisions right now. Violations are always going to be a tricky thing, particularly when they're municipal violations. We have some ways of addressing that with some fee changes, which I think, we definitely want to proceed with. But I'm sure there's more we can do. Again, it's sort of it's that dilemma of the being reactionary. Sometimes we don't know. And then when we do find out, it's very difficult to fix things at that point, you know, so, but those are all good.
Thanks, Jerry. Anybody else? Any questions or comments?
Or I just did one follow-up to Jerry's thought. I wonder if there's a way to work with the appropriate entities to get a continuing education credit for like Pinelands zoning that could be done at the league, because they would like, I would assume that you need continuing education credits, and they would probably like some even advice to more directly to their work on an everyday basis.
Is the lead grant is. About active audience.
We thought about that over the years. There's all kinds of, you know this, if you're a licensed planner in the state, you know, there's continuing education requirements. And there are ways to sort of get at that part of the community as well. Not just the zoning officers, but the planning. I'm trying to put on a series of these.
So, but the more people you have at the local level that know the answers, the more likely somebody's to get the
That's
answer.
the theory. They don't need to come together, but everybody will know the answer. Yes. So.
Thank you.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
I was gonna add something to that. That could be.
Yeah.
So the commission is registered with the Department of Education to issue continuing education credits for teachers who attend the short course. I don't know if that could extend to. It's a song.
Yeah.
To what you're talking about, but that would be great if it did.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
For professional engineers and professional planners, we need to get continuing education.
Right.
And the course needs to be approved by the licensing agency.
Yeah.
And once that course is approved, you can put it online and say you get so many continuing education credits for taking this course.
Yeah, so we have to kind of figure out a number of different
Right.
steps.
And you could have multiple courses, actually, you know, 3 credit courses, 5 credit courses. And
There you go. You added to the presentation. You tried so much.
You take my advice, you've got time to do that.
Teaching the course.
No, it's something we've talked about for years. I feel like this would be a good time to sort of attempt to do one, you know, see how it goes, and then maybe expand it to a bigger program in the future.
Any other comments? All right, seeing, hearing none, public comment here. And for folks watching at home, numbers on the screen, please silent, and then we'll give those folks a couple minutes. I think we already have a couple.
We have 2.
All right, but we'll start with in the room. Heidi.
Hello, everyone.
Dr. Heidi.
Thank you. IDA Pinelands Preservation Alliance. I'd just like to commend the staff for all of the work that you do, and especially with the care and intention that we see go into the work, it makes my job easier. And we were disappointed, when we heard that you didn't get the budget increases that you very severely need for staff, so we'd like to be more involved with the advocacy for the budget next year. And sorry, there are a lot of plates spinning. I'd like to remind you of one that was put on the back burner from the climate committee. I recall that the commissioners identified a net loss of trees policy as a priority for the committee to pursue. So I know it's kind of an amorphous idea at the moment. So we certainly owe you some kind of research and maybe background research and suggestions on how this could actually be implemented. We'd like to help your staff in whatever way we can. So we just like to see some kind of mechanism to increase the preservation of trees and properly value the carbon sequestration value that these trees bring to the Pinelands and all of New Jersey. So thank you again.
Thanks, Katie. Anyone else in the room wish to make a public comment?
Hello, I'm Dr. Amy Golden, and I am a trustee and an ambassador of Black Run Preserve, and I also live in Sturbridge Lakes. And I just wanted to say that we have a petition that's been going around to oppose the cluster portion of the Black Run rule proposal, and it's only been up for about 3 weeks. And we have 1,569 signatures opposing that cluster. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Not right. All right, anyone else in the room? Okay, seeing none, let's take one of our.
Turn this off for a second. I think this person was on first. Good morning, caller. You are live in our meeting. Can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Kevin Coakley.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm an attorney. I represent the Clayton companies who operate for sand and mining operations in the Pinelands area, particularly in the Kirkwood, Cohansey area. We've been involved with the Pinelands rulemaking on the Kirkwood Cohansey for the last year. We've made many comments. Some of the comments have found their way into the revised regulations that were just recommended by your committee this morning. Others have found their way into the comments from the that have been made or the responses that have been made by the Pinelands Commission staff to our comments. But there are two parts of the regulations that you've recommended this morning that we believe ought to be reviewed. The main point is that there is no technical way to measure the volume of water going back into the ground or into the pond from a mining operation. I think that was alluded to during your discussion this morning. Yet the regulation that you're adopting or recommending to the commission has a phrase in there that we are to provide to quantify the volume of water returned to the source. So the obligation to quantify is antithetical to the way it's done, and the way it's done is the reporting to DEP is that it's a reasonable estimate is provided. That's what the DEP standard is. Excuse me. I didn't hear you. Did you say something?
No, no one said anything.
Okay, I apologize. To quantify is not possible, and we ask that be changed to estimate. We also think that the rule in defining what is a non-consumptive use should also reflect the fact that the 90% of diverted water being returned to the source a reasonable estimate, and that also is in accord with DEP. Yeah, the comments made do reflect the idea that there must be an estimate, but the rule as adopted, does not reflect that. And so we suggest that the commission not act on the rule at their next meeting, but rather consider these minor changes to the rule that allows for accurate reporting. I know there's a desire on the part of the commission to finish this process. I respect that. I believe that these rule changes that we have suggested certainly would be deemed non-substantive. That they don't significantly enlarge or curtail the scope of the regulation, and that's really the test of whether or not a rule is substantive or non-substantive. What we're looking for as an industry is the ability to submit hydrological reports to the commission that are within the scope of our ability, and it's not within the scope of our ability to quantify that amount of water. We put these comments and these specific suggested 1-word or 2-word rule changes to commission administrative management in a letter dated August 22nd. I don't know whether that was distributed to your committee. We sent that letter when we were advised on August 11th as to what was the time frame of the procedures. We got the proposed response to our comments last Friday, so we were very quick to send in this request on the 22nd. We hope that you would consider it, or the Pinelands Commission itself would consider it before adopting the regulations with an impossible level of requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have another caller.
We do. Good morning, caller. You are live in our meeting. Can you please state your name for the record?
Good morning. This is Fred Akers from the Great Egg Harbor Watershed Association. And I just thought I'd check in and express my appreciation and congratulations to the P&I committee for all your accomplishments. I've always thought that the P&I committee was the main workhorse mission. And you all kind of do double duty because you vet the issues as they come up and recommend them to the commission, and then you move to the commission and work on them again then. So we really appreciate your work. One thing I noticed that seemed missing from the accomplishments report was the scientific work that you all do. So that was not on there. But anyways, hello to everybody and keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other people on the line?
No other callers currently.
All right, with that, I will close the public comment period. Any commissioners have any closing remarks? Hearing and seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
Motion.
Everybody wants to get out of here. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?